Hey, distinction students, civic education with knowledge on the academy. You're perfect with the here, Mr. Cupid CJ. So we are still looking at international human rights instruments. International human rights instruments. I want you to pay attention so that you can understand this one. Very simple and straightforward. So look at our chart here. In the previous video, we looked at the first three documents that make up the International Bill of Rights. The International Bill of Rights. We looked at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Then we also looked at the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So in this video, we're now going to focus on the specialized human rights instruments. Now, why are they called specialized human rights instruments? Why are they called specialized? This is because they focus on a particular human rights issue or a particular group of people. This topic is very important and at the same time it's tricky. You have to understand each and every term, concept here. So one, we have explained why these documents are called specialized human rights instruments. So you don't have to miss that one. You have to know that these are documents which focus on particular issues, particular human rights issues, or particular group of people. Remember, firstly, they came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we have to rescue the Jews from the Nazi Germans. From the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they came up with two other documents. The ICCPR expanded on the civil and political rights, whilst the ICESCR expanded on the economic and social rights. Still more, this was not enough. They said, let us further our thinking. Let us further our thinking. Let us form what is called specialized human rights instruments. Now, in this video, we are only going to look at two specialized human rights instruments. Actually, there are about 5 to 6 specialized human rights instruments. But as you can see here, I've only listed 4. And in this video, I'll only explain 2. I do not want to confuse you. So, firstly, we are going to look at the first one, which is the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. So look, I said these are called specialized human rights instruments. Why? They only deal with particular human rights issue or group of people. So this one is only dealing with racial discrimination. Racial discrimination. So it came into force in 1969. And it was drafted to draw attention to matters of racial discrimination which were still rampant in the world. So, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was there. But again, the UN discovered that there is still racial discrimination. So, it's like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not enough to stop these issues from happening. So, they said, let's come up with a specialized instrument that will just address this issue of racial discrimination. So now, what is the principal definition of racial discrimination? What racial discrimination is this document talking about? So, the ICERD, the ICERD, explains racial discrimination as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or any performance based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin which has the purpose of impairing the recognition or enjoyment on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. No exclusion. Distinction, which simply means difference here. So that is the principal definition of racial discrimination according to the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Now, let us look at the summary of provisions in this document. Condemn racial discrimination, segregation, and apartheid. Prohibit the act of discrimination by individuals or organizations. These are things that you will find in the ICED document, the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. These are the things that you are going to find there. Assure everyone within the powers adequate protection and remedies. Condemn all propaganda and organizations based on ideas or theories of superiority of one race or group. Prohibit and eliminate racial discrimination and equal enjoyment of all their rights. Undertake immediate and effective measures in teaching, education, culture, and information with a view of combating prejudices which lead to racial discrimination. Any form of racial discrimination is prohibited in this document. So as you have seen, this is a specialized human rights instrument. It only deals with a particular issue, and that is racial discrimination. That is it. It was adopted, or it came into force in 1969. Apart from the ICED, we have the second one, which is called the Convention or the Covenant. I said treaty, convention, or covenant, that's the same thing. Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Just a reminder, I said specialized human rights instruments only deal with specific issues or groups of people. So the previous one was dealing with a specific issue, and that was racial discrimination. But this one is now dealing with a particular group of people, and that is what? Women. So this one only deals with the rights of women, discrimination against women. So this came about after the failure of the 1967 declaration to eliminate discrimination against women. It was observed that females still suffer the worst discrimination in the socio-economic as well as the civil and political rights. Besides those documents which make up the International Bill of Rights being introduced, women were still suffering the worst discrimination. So the UN now decided to come up with a document specifically meant to protect or to promote women's rights, and that was the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. The instrument was put in force in 1979 to directly deal with the elimination of discrimination against women. All forms of discrimination against women is prohibited in this document, the CEDAW. Please remember the year when it came into force, 1979. Summary of provisions in the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. Establish legal protection of the rights of women on an equal basis with men. Promote the principle of equality of men and women in their domestic legislation. Modify or abolish existing national legislation and practices which constitute discrimination against women. And lastly, eliminate discrimination in the enjoyment of all rights between men and women. So these are just provisions, more like things that you can find in this document that talks about women's rights. That's all. Very simple and straightforward. So now the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, has an optional protocol. Remember, we said an optional protocol is a provision attached to an international human rights instrument. In order to do what? In order to offer more protection to the rights contained in that document. So this document, which is called the CEDAW, also has an optional protocol, which was adopted in 1999. Now, what is the function of this optional protocol? It allows the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to receive and hear cases of violations of women's rights. So once a country is a state party to this protocol, then the citizens will be able to report to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women the cases of violations of women's rights. If you are not a state party to this optional protocol, then you are unable to do that. So we have just done two specialized human rights instruments here. Two specialized human rights instruments. The Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Important point. These are called specialized instruments because they deal with particular human rights issue or particular group of people. So like I said, we are just doing two specialized human rights instruments, and the other two will be done in the next